Welcome to episode 317 of Grid Talk. Today we're here to postpone the mid-season break mania with something a little bit different that may or may not go wrong. I'm just putting that out there. My name is Ruby Pricing. Joining me, we have Grid Talk co-hosts Owain Medford and Tom Downey.
Hello.
Hello.
And Formula Talk host and from EF1, Sophia Richmond.
Hi.
But first, before we get into this episode, we must thank our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. But first, if you enjoy this podcast, we would love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're one of the 72% of people who aren't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. So, for as far back as Formula One has existed, there have been opinions on it, whether it be a printed newspaper article, a podcast, broadcast presenters. There's always been a fair share of opinions to go from a simmer to the boil. Today, we're here to share our spiciest of hot takes about Formula One. Here's how the format is going to work. Each of our panel will get 90 seconds in which to argue their hot take. After those 90 seconds are done, we shall open the floor up to a panel discussion where the rest of our panel will have a chance to respond. For the listeners at home, share your hot takes in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or send them to the socials, which you can find at Grid Talk UK. So now we understand the assignment. Sophia, you're in the hot seat. There's 90 seconds on the clock, and it's time to add some fuel to this fire. What is your hot take in 3, 2, 1?
Well, we're definitely starting it off, I think, very controversial. I think Lewis will never win his 8th title. I think, given with the new regulations and how behind Mercedes was seasons ago with the upgrades, and obviously they're now kind of getting back into it a little bit decently. I think the Red Bull's too competitive. I think also other teams are going to get moving up closer to the top level of the grids. I think it's just it's unrealistic for Lewis to get it. George is performing very well and is potentially outperforming him, as we saw last season and potentially for this season as well. But he will never get his 8th title. Like, I know people were saying that he's going to wait until his 8th and retire. I think that will never happen, even in the next couple of years.
Plenty of time still on the clock, but
I know,
still. You know, we're starting off one of the biggest rivalries in F1 in the last 5 years. Owain, I'm going to take it to you. What's your response?
Let's hear it.
I think that would be a reasonable prediction. Maybe a few years ago in the pre-cost cap era. I think after the cost cap, we've seen how quickly, maybe it was just a result of Red Bull backing off development because they can last year, and creating a monster this year. So I can only imagine what it'll be like next year. But I think it's one of those things where the teams, they're closer together, but they're also, the rate of development through the season changes so much now. So teams can start off quite far behind, as we saw with Mercedes last year and this year, and be coming towards race wins and putting it on pole. And, maybe that's just mess ups by Red Bull and they're sort of holding back a little bit. They're sandbagging, but I think there's a certain amount of the sort of fluidity of the grid means that, teams can start off really far back like Mercedes have. But if you've got a decent amount of personnel and you're working really hard and you make, the intelligence doesn't go away. That's how we've seen people make, sort of big jumps, even with lesser sort of amounts of money, financially speaking. I think it's possible for Mercedes to get back up to the top of the grid that will help Lewis.
I mean, by all means, Mercedes can win races and do well in constructors, but I don't think it will be enough to win a world championship title. That's the biggest thing. I think how Max has been in his dominance, which I'll talk about him later on potentially, his dominance, and even the other Red Bull with Checo and Ferrari, like there is other teams that make it more competitive, but I don't think it will be competitive enough to win a world championship. They will definitely win races in the next couple of seasons, by all means, 100%. We saw that with Brazil last year. We might see that for this season, but who knows actually because of Red Bull. But I don't think it will be enough for Lewis to actually get the world championship title for him.
I think Lewis's time has almost sort of come and gone, to be honest. You know, he's definitely getting into the twilight years of his career. I'm not saying that he can't win a title later on in his career, because you look at people like Niki Lauda, etc., who won titles when they were that bit older. But Mercedes nailed the 2014 engine regulations, and they then, you know, the 2014 to 2016, that Merc was unstoppable, you know, all those 3 years. And then obviously 2020, that Merc was unstoppable, you know, because they had no real competition that year. But 2017 to 2019, we saw when there was a slight regulation change, and then 2019 we had a slight change to the front wing as well. I think it simplified it a bit. Yes, Hamilton won and Mercedes won, you know, constructors and all the rest of it, but it's just, you know, just Merc did not nail the 2022 regs at all. You know, they got it pretty wrong, and you know, they went for a concept which was great on paper, and you know, you've always got to try it, and then you know. Then this year, 2023, they tried the no sidepod thing again, and it just hasn't worked. You know, when you get to the top in sport or anything, there's only one way which you can go once you hit the top, and that is down. And that is where Merc have gone, and you know that's where Hamilton's gone, and you know that's where Red Bull and Vettel went in the early 2010s. That's where Max and Red Bull are going to go at some point. You know, maybe 2026 or 2025. We don't know yet, but. The other thing you've got to factor in is, does Hamilton still have the desire? You know, I think he does, but you know he didn't win a race last year. His teammate won a race, you know, and a sprint. Would Merc back him, or would they back Russell? That's the other thing you've got to look at as well. I'm not opening that to a bigger question because that's probably a podcast in itself. Let's do that next week. But you know, I just wonder if we sort of had a bit of a changing of the guard at Mercedes as well.
Bit of an interesting one there, changing of the guard. You know, there is obviously talk about last season, Russell, you know, very much had the measure of Lewis. This season, it's been a bit different. But a stat that I came across in our sister podcast, The Monkey Seat, the other day was that, you know, if you look across since Russell joined Mercedes, both drivers, have got an almost equal amount of points. So they're very much extracting the maximum across. If we use the usual driver logic, you know, like when you see two drivers being within a tenth of each other in qualifying, you know, across that period of time, they've definitely, you know, extracted the maximum amount of the car. But however, obviously there's time for more things to come out of that. Does anyone else have anything else to add to this hot take? Does anyone want to? We've obviously had an argument very much supporting it. We've had an argument very kind of straying into against it. Anything to round it off?
I didn't outright sort of go against it because I kind of think you're probably right. I think it's possible for Mercedes to get to the point where they're back in championship sort of competition level. But I think, you know, Russell will sort of change the game there. Like you say, it's a changing of the guard. I think Russell is kind of, he's not Bottas, which is, you know, it's one of those things where I think he's much more like Lewis than Valtteri ever was. And I think it would be a much more of an inter-team fight. And yeah, Lewis has got the experience to handle that. But I just think maybe the sun is setting on that career.
It has been a long one. We have seen drivers go for longer. I'll keep coming back. Fernando Alonso, cough, cough. But yeah, we'll settle that hot take for now. Owain, you are the second in the hot seat. 90 seconds on the clock, and we're putting things onto a medium heat. What's your hot take in 3, 2, 1?
My hot take is that no circuit should be removed from the calendar purely because it produces poor racing. Safety issues, absolutely, it should be removed. But If it's just that it produces poor racing, I'm thinking Monaco. I'm thinking maybe Zandvoort. Hungary even. Of course, those are interesting races, but my main point is that it's a world championship, and you have to compete against the circuits as much as the other drivers. The range of challenges that we see in F1 is what makes it the pinnacle of motorsport. It's not an NHRA drag strip. It's not Pikes Peak. You're not building a car to do one thing really well. You have to build it to do all of the things really well. It has to be fast on the straights at Monza. It has to be it has to be able to deal with the twists and turns of Monaco and Zandvoort. It has to, it has to sort of do every single thing. It has to be able to go through the elevation change of Spa, but also be on the tracks that are billiard table smooth, like you know, for let's say Silverstone. So it's got to be able to do all of those things. And what we look for are the drivers and teams that can build a car that will go around those circuits as on average the fastest over the course of the season. That's why we watch. That's why we tune in. It's not that the poor racing is just a matter of, well, you know what, that's just kind of how it goes. You've got to be able to do all of that, and it's the one who's fastest in qualifying.
Oh, you got that almost bang on there. I was ready to mute you then. But yeah, from Burnley drums to car parks, there's certainly a lot to be said about the various circuits added to the F1 calendar, and some taken away too soon. Sophia, do you have a response?
Yeah, I mean, I half agree, but also disagree at the same time. I think there's unpredictability when it comes to some of these races that are iconic. I'll take Monaco, for example. It's been known as a boring race, but when we had rain a couple of seasons ago, it made it very interesting to watch. But I also do believe that we need to allow for other tracks that have not had as much opportunity to come onto the calendar, i.e. bring back Hockenheim, go like some of the racing that we don't really see all the time. Kalami, for example, that's been on the rumors. And in order to do that, they're going to take away the circuits that are performing less to give opportunity to other historical tracks or new tracks, not street circuits, not Vegas. I'm not talking about the States, but just talking about other ones. We're not racing that much in Asia. Obviously, we're expanding a bit more post-COVID, but we're not racing in Africa. Like, there should be more opportunities for other circuits to kind of get involved into the calendar where it is possible. I do believe keeping historic tracks are given, Spa, Monaco, Silverstone, all those ones, but at the same time, if it's a couple seasons, maybe 3 to 4 races, and it kind of produces the same results, maybe shake it up for one season and see. Take Paul Ricard, for example. We've taken that off now. So at the moment, like, obviously it didn't produce the best racing, and they've taken off and now filled in with, I hate to say Vegas, but that could be quite an interesting one. We don't know. We could have had Malaysia. We could have had other ones kind of come into play. So I agree, but also disagree in that, because we need to let more tracks into the calendar to make it more, as you say, universal world championship.
Yeah, it's kind of like finding a, balancing act between historical and modern. Tom, do you have a response?
Yeah, so and you made a really good point, where you said that, it's a world championship and it's not, whilst the sport is entertaining, it's not an entertainment series. And, it's in a similar way to, any other sport. So I watched the rugby yesterday. I watched the England v Wales game. It was a dire game. The first half especially was awful. Really, really, really dull, and no entertainment as such. And it was just a really boring game. And you have some circuits which are like that. Some circuits do not produce the best racing to watch as a spectator, but as we know, granted, when we play the game, obviously it's very different. When we have our F1 sessions, we'll be putting on and we'll be going, oh god, I absolutely love this circuit. You're driving around it, just pounding out the laps, and you might not be overtaking anyone. You might not be past anyone. You might not be anywhere near someone, but it'd be sort of like tracks which perhaps don't always provide the best racing, and sorry, when I say the best racing, I mean action and overtaking. Oh yeah, ban sparkles. For paraphrase, and I don't mean sparkles by people blowing up. It's it's like sometimes you get races which are just absolute bangers, and people go, oh, this circuit used to stay on the calendar, but in reality, it can be there's been rain, there's been an issue in quali, and then there's the driver's spun out, or whatever it is. It's just thrown up a bit of a mixed order, and that's when sometimes you see the races that are absolute bangers. 9 times out of 10, we have races where, especially this season, and we had it in we have it in every dominant era where we see teams that are just at the top and they take pole or they take a front row and they just waltz off, and you can't really blame circuits for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is something to be said. I think it was kind of hinted at, or at least very much, mentioned in other sports. Like, every now and then in football, you get a 0-0 draw. That doesn't mean that it wasn't a good match. That just means that no team came out on top. When it comes to racing, that can still happen. A driver can win by 22 seconds and we still have a good race. Just we're not racing for P1 in that scenario. We're racing for something else. But, in terms of races and calendars and circuits, give everywhere a shot. Within reason is my opinion. But the caliber of the fight for first shouldn't necessarily be the thing that dictates as to whether it's coming back the next time around. But looking at some more hot takes then, Tom, your first time in the hot seat, 90 seconds on the clock. Are we simmering or going to the boil? What's your hot take in 3, 2, 1?
Piastri's going to win a race before Lando, and I don't even think it's that hot of a take. As soon as Piastri got all the upgrades that Lando had, he's had the measure of him. He's been arguably better than him. He outdid him in Spa. Yes, Lando has more podiums, but Lando had more upgrades to begin with. And Piastri's still a rookie. And look at what he's doing as a rookie in that car. It's only a matter of time before he crosses that check of that, takes that check of flag P1. I don't think it will be this year, mainly because of how dominant Red Bull are. But I think when McLaren get into a position where where they can take a win, I think Piastri will do it because Lando bottled it. Discuss, he says, after not even half of the time allocated to him. But adding some paprika to this papaya, the McLaren drivers have been fiery in the second quarter of this season, and both are still chasing their very first wins. Very spicy. Who wants to take it from here?
I'll take it.
Go on.
I don't disagree. I don't even have a response. My entire response is I don't think I'm kind of co-opting it, but Lando Norris is a good driver. Piastri is a great driver. That's the difference. Piastri had a year out. He had a testing program. He went through the turmoil, honestly, of going through the contract disputes and all of that, and then he's come along, and as you say, Tom, very quickly, he's faster than Lando. He's probably better than Lando. Lando's unfortunate in that he's kind of come along as a decent rookie, but and a decent driver, and he's had the measure of the people he's been up against. But I think the people that he's been up against have been around his skill level. They haven't been better than his skill level, and he's yet to beat Piastri. He might have the experience, but I don't think he's as exciting as Piastri is. I don't think Piastri seems more in the flavour of Max Verstappen, Alonso, Hamilton, the greats. Whereas I'm sorry, but I think Lando is more like a Carlos Sainz, unfortunately. He can win races, but I don't think he's going to go and win one first. I think, that time, unfortunately, is been and gone.
Oh, as a McLaren fan, I think the biggest thing is that Russia's going to haunt Lando for his career. What would have been his win. And that decision to not change tires, I think will be probably his, Achilles heel of his career, his race career. I think it just wasn't a good call. But with also the upgrades as well, McLaren is still upgrading as well. They have not fully done all the upgrades because they saw that it was working at 75%. They're like, we're just gonna hold and wait and then let that settle and then maybe add some more upgrades. So there could be a little bit more, and it could be detrimental to some of the to both of the drivers. It could be beneficial to the drivers. We don't know. We've seen it with upgrades. Take Mercedes, for example. Sometimes they've done upgrades and it turned out 180, didn't benefit them at all. Alpine. It pains me because Lando is a good driver, but I think, like both of y'all have said, I think his days have passed to when he's hitting his peak. I can see him very much to be like a Sainz or a Bottas, I think, going up to how it is. I think Oscar, even with taking time out, still has the skill, and I think he's still developing it. Obviously, learning about these new tracks that he's not been racing to in his previous careers, but he has a lot more talent and ability. Because I mean, he holds a record similar to George Russell, I believe, winning every rookie year in his the feeder series as well. So like that's a record that only 3 people I think have at the moment. Yeah, 3. So that's a good feat to have that shows that how he is as a driver. And I think his ability, his Piastri's driver style is a lot more full on compared to Lando. Lando takes the reserve, the kind of I'm just gonna wait to see something happens and then dive in. Whereas Oscar's like willing to take some moves, as we saw in the last couple of races as well. But pains me to say because I do like Lando Norris. But yeah, no, Oscar. I think to be fair, I think they could actually have a win. That might be adding to a hot take. They could actually have a win this season. I think it's gonna be a sprint though, not an actual race.
In that case, does it really count? Do we count sprints towards all of these totals? Who knows? But I mean, ultimately, like it does seem fairly obvious. I'll say fairly obvious. It does seem fairly obvious that the McLaren drivers are sort of matched in the machinery that they've got. We have seen obviously like Lando winning through beating his teammate through strategy. In terms of staying out a bit longer or undercutting and putting in a belter of a lap to come out, 4 seconds up the road by the time the pit stops play out. But it does seem very likely that Oscar Piastri Oscar has had a run of poor luck when it comes to things like safety cars. Eventually that luck's going to turn, and that's going to be the thing that puts him, on the top step, I think. With obviously, his ability and an improving McLaren at the same time. It's just circumstance and all of that. But yeah, circling things back around now, second time in the hot seat for Sophia Richmond. There's 90 seconds on the clock. Are we going spicy? Are we going Italian style spicy? Let's find out. 3, 2, 1, go.
I would say Italian style spicy. I think Ferrari will never have dominance like they used to. I think while they do have a good car, I think the staffing with changing team principals, Fred Vasseur, I think when he was first announced, I think it sounded like a great fit. But like looking at how it's been, obviously there's been a lot of shakeups with Mekis leaving to go to AlphaTauri. I think right now they need to focus on their staff structure and looking at branding. But the issue is that there's so much probably outside noise that is affecting a lot of the decisions because they don't want to upset like the Tifosi and like all their fans. But the car is great. I think the car could be a good contender. It's the staff. And also, I hate to say, Charles is too complacent now. I think he's been with Ferrari for a bit. He's been in the mess of bad strategy calls. He's made stupid mistakes. Take Azerbaijan, Baku, I am stupid into play. You also have his other I am stupid that took place, in France last year, I think it was. Well, I just think between him and Sainz, I hate to say both of them go. I think they need new blood, new drivers, and younger drivers, and take his brother into Ferrari, take other development drivers, Ollie Behrman, for example. I think will actually give run for the money with the car that they have.
You are both pushing the time limit here, Owain and Sophia. That's just before my timer went out on both occasions. But yeah, Ferrari not quite having the dominance they've ever used to. There does appear to be something, that is holding Ferrari back. And I don't know if it's part of trying to remain traditional Ferrari or, trying to appease the Tifosi. But Tom, what have you got to say?
Ferrari don't even know how to win. They don't even know how to win a race, let alone win a championship or become a dominant force like they used to be. Ferrari back in the day, the Schumacher era, they had Jean Todt and Ross Brawn in charge, and they had Schumacher piloting that car, and they had Barrichello picking up the pieces when needed. We are never going to see that again from Ferrari. I'm going to go out there and say it. We are never going to see that again because they just don't know how to win. They bottle it at every given opportunity. Last year, they could have won the constructors. They could have, they could have potentially won the drivers' championship. We could have had a real scrap last year. Reliability let them down. So and it's not like they buy in engines from somewhere else. It is their own engine which went bang at as soon as they introduce upgrades, puff, up in smoke every weekend. Both cars, more or less. The strategy, it's just a running joke by this point with Ferrari. I'm not even a Ferrari fan, and I feel sorry for Ferrari. That's how bad it is. That's how much of a meme they are. And it's every time I see them come in onto strategy or whatever, or you see like the team radio come up, I just get that image of the Simpsons meme in my head, where it's like, be careful, they're about to do something stupid, and it's just like, you just know they are. That's what I say every time they come on the radio. It's just like, they're such a frustrating team. Yeah, exactly. Every time we hear copy, we are checking, or you hear
question.
Question asking their driver to do the strategy. Mate, that's your job. You do the strategy. It's such a sad state of affairs when the drivers take the strategy into their own hands whilst they're racing. Seb did it, when he was there. Leclerc's now started doing it. Sainz is now doing it. They both did it in Canada, and that was their best result of the season. It's like, come on. Yeah, so if your team's running like that, they ain't going to win. Nah, never.
Owain, is there any hope for Ferrari to ever get this dominance back?
There is.
Lies.
It's get rid of the current race team, and get. You know what? It's stop focusing on their road cars. Like we see it all the time. You know what? Ferrari have been killing it with the road cars, and it's ruined their racing operation. They've won Le Mans this year. That's the only race that they've won this year, and it's Le Mans, right? You're right. The race team is abysmal. They don't know how to run a racing team anymore. Everyone else does. That's the biggest thing. It used to be, Ferrari. I don't think they've even got the shame anymore, which is the worst part. Enzo would be rolling in his grave at this point. There's stories from 2004 when, back when Ferrari was at its most dominant, where people, engineers were hanging their heads in shame at not getting a 1-2 at every race that year. That's the level that we're talking about. Like, it doesn't exist anymore. What they really need. I don't even know how they get back to it, but if they do get back to that level, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. They are the most. We talk about it all the time, but they are the longest standing, most well known racing team on the planet. If no one knows people don't know Formula One, and they know Ferrari. If Ferrari gets its act together, if they do worse commercially, they'll do better in the races, and that's all they need to do. It's a few changes and a bit of steady-handedness and getting the drive back, and we'll be sitting there going, well, where did that come from? They proved it in 2017. They can do it. They just need to get the race team better together.
I think people just need to hold off on what Ferrari used to be and now start looking at what Ferrari could be. That's probably the biggest thing, because it's a historical brand, 100% on it. But take McLaren, for example, as well. Again, historical, and obviously they've kind of changed how they are positioning themselves within it. Obviously, they're doing well in other disciplines. IndyCar, for example, P3 yesterday at the time of recording, whereas Ferrari's just not investing time, and they're just thinking of, oh, we have fans, we have followers, we can get the money for sponsorships and then kind of do what we used to, but they're losing fans. I mean, I joke when I say this, I do a pub quiz almost every Sunday, and my team name for the longest while was Ferrari Strategy Team, because I was so awful and I was always coming last or making the wrong answer calls. I mean, I'm good now. It's been a good year or so, but when I first started off, it was really bad, and it was a running joke on it.
Have you renamed your team to Hannah Schmitz now?
Wait, what?
Are you if you're getting good now? Have you renamed yourself to Hammerschmidt's?
No, I've changed it to the Bermuda Triangle with the song "Staying Alive." I think that's a bit more fitting. But yeah, we're all kind of in agreement. I think they just need to kind of start from scratch. I even think Charles and Carlos Sainz should be gone and get new drivers in. I think new blood as a rebrand of everything of the Ferrari, what used to be is in the past. We now need to look in the future. And it could be 2026, I think is probably the best way to re-enter themselves as a rebranded Ferrari with all the changes and potentially new teams coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when people say F1, they do obviously, most people do mean McLaren, Ferrari, the biggest names in the brand. But speaking of, I think we're moving on to a very fitting one here, from the planning, considering, how many, talks there are about things that go on behind the curtains in Formula One. But Owain, you are currently in the hot seat for the second time. Your hot take with 90 seconds on the clock starts in 3, 2, 1.
My hot take is that no team should be allowed a rules veto, a long-standing team payment, or any other special benefits just for being in the sport for a long period of time. My reason for that is that, right, the rules veto is claimed to be the steady hand of experience. For the good of the sport, and it's wielded by Ferrari. They're the only team that has it in the Concord Agreement. And my biggest thing about it is that it's, team personnel come and go. There's no one for, even back in the day when there was Enzo running the show. Yeah, okay, the guy had been there so long that he'd run the race team long enough that you could actually rely on one person to have that steady hand of proven judgment of what is good for Formula One as a sport. But that's not the case anymore. People come and go, teams get bought and sold, and personnel move around more than ever before. For Ferrari to have a rules veto increasingly incentivizes them to use it as a gain for their gain, instead of everyone else. Additionally, the special benefits that are going to tend to accumulate to the teams that have been around longest and by the nature have won more. So automatically it ascends upwards to the teams that have the most, get the most. That needs to go. Neither seem congruent with the idea of a level playing field in terms of the rules for me.
Putting it close again there, but not quite the 90 seconds bang on. But yeah, I mean, no team is going to vote for a rule that actively harms them. Tom, how would you like to come into this?
I completely agree, to be honest. I don't even think it's that much of a hot take. I think it's just common sense, something which is sadly lacking in F1. And you made a very good point about these sort of like, I don't know if you call them historic payments or whatever, or these sort of like outstanding payments or whatever. Not outstanding, but the ones that the Ferrari get just for existing. Does that mean we can call Ferrari Kim Kardashian because they're just getting paid to exist? Because that's what it seems like. And it's like, if in this era of the cost cap and all the rest of it, it's like, throwing 400 million at Ferrari, who, yes, they bring a name, and they bring they bring a lot of prestige and heritage and all the rest of it. Ultimately, in modern F1, prestige and heritage doesn't actually mean that much. As much as I love the older cars, one of my favorite ever F1 cars, FW14B, and then one of my other favorite ever cars, Alonso's 2005 Renault, that V10, love it. But that kind of like that prestige and heritage, it doesn't really account for anything these days. And that's not a slight on, sort of new fans we've got, because I love seeing new fans in the sport, and the sort of like new era we've got through the big push through social media, the liberty have got, Drive to Survive, and, teams being a lot more sort of like outreach and all the rest of it. Look at McLaren now than when they used to be, in the Ron Dennis era. They're a completely different team, a lot more, out there, a lot more fun, all the rest of it. And I love that. It's brilliant for the sport. It's what the sport needs. But teams that get these these sort of like gentleman's agreement payments, it's got Bernie Ecclestone written all over it. Just a big briefcase full of cash just slipped in the door. Just go on, there you are. Cheers, and ta-da. And then it's just like, oh, by the way, you can have that engine, but we won't tell anybody, kind of thing. It's got that Sly Dog Bernie written all over it, and if Ferrari want to sort of throw their toys at the pram, which most teams seem to do every couple of years, where they say, "Oh, if we don't like it, we'll pull out the sport." Red Bull did it, Mercedes did it, Ferrari did it. Most teams sort of, most of the sort of bigger teams seem to do it, and it's just throwing their toys at the pram. They're not going to do it because if they were going to do it, they'd have done it. And it's just it's not right for the sport. And in the cost cap era, where teams can spend so much, that money that they are just funneling back into these teams to basically exist and basically paying them to be on the grid. Surely that can be better invested elsewhere. Perhaps that money could be invested in, financing all these new street circuits we've got. And instead of having celebrities who don't really have that much of a vested interest in F1, can maybe look to perhaps be lowering the cost of tickets just a little bit. So even people who are on pretty decent wages in the UK, without sounding arrogant, someone like myself, means I wouldn't have to remortgage my house if I wanted to go to an F1 weekend.
It is kind of ridiculous to the extent of how much ticket prices have escalated, particularly over the last, few years at the very least. But, comparing the different, obviously, eras, like financial changes aside, when it comes to, paying a team just for existing, all you're really doing there is just saying, we can't afford to lose you as a brand. So, here's some money. Please agree with the decisions that we make. But then if they're going to threaten to pull out anyway, then where is your benefit to, paying them the money to stick around? There is no benefit really other than keeping brands around. But then they'll just say, well, we don't like this decision. We don't like other teams being allowed to come into the sport. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. Now we're putting someone else back in the hot seat. It's Tom. You've got 90 seconds. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, so my hot take is that Hamilton has got the measure of George Russell this year. And I know, people who listen to this, so you may be watching this later on, they're like, oh, yeah, Hamilton's a 10-time world champion. Yeah, well done, he is. But, Russell, he won F3, then F2 back to, that's going to get clipped. But, Russell won F3, then F2, back to back. No, he's not Ruby. And Ruby's put in the chat, he's an 8-time world champion. No, he's not. He lost 2016 and he lost all the others. So yeah, try again. Last year, I thought at the time that Russell's come in, he's beating Hamilton. He took pole in Hungary, and then he won the sprint in the feature race in Brazil, and blah blah blah. What we didn't realize at the time, and especially when we were seeing Hamilton qualifying quite low down the order, was Hamilton was running alternate setups, he was running alternate wings. He was basically a test mule. Now that Russell and Hamilton have got the same car, Hamilton is basically dusting him off, and it's it's just like Russell has let perhaps a bit of not insecurity, but let a bit of sort of like frustration show through in his driving, and I think Hamilton's got the better of him.
Hamilton's got the better of him. Just you were using that extra time that you saved up earlier there, weren't you, Tom? In order to fit that in, as well as telling me off for using the chat.
Tell me that wasn't a perfect 90 seconds.
It wasn't a perfect 90 seconds, but it was close.
It's good enough.
But yeah, Hamilton has the measure of Russell. An interesting one, considering obviously statements earlier in this podcast. But Sophia, you've obviously talked about Hamilton not quite obviously being able to get that 8th title. Would you like to follow up on Tom's comments here?
I mean, if you're looking at the standings right now, Lewis has 148 points. George has 99 points. Let me double check that. Yeah, 99 points. He's currently tied with Charles Leclerc. Also, George has been in this racing game much less than Lewis has as well. I think if you were to nitpick the amount of time that Lewis has been in the same amount of time as George, I think George is outperforming Lewis. I think he had a great opening season, don't get me wrong, with McLaren. He had great times with Mercedes. But I think if you were to take George's time in a Williams and now with the Mercedes, I think is better than what Lewis has done in the same amount of time. I think also the fact that George has been in a Williams that's not performed very well and it's been a butt end of a lot of the jokes that we say on here. I think it's also showing his determination that he wants to prove himself and he's going to constantly try to prove himself for it. Even with the fact that he got points in the Williams and podium, like that is a big deal. If you did it in a Mercedes, it's in a Mercedes. Okay. I still stand. I think George is better than Lewis. I think it's going to happen this season as well. Obviously, everyone's saying, oh, Lewis last season, it was the changes of the car. But again, it's the biggest discussion ever. What's more important, the driver or the car? Because the thing is that if you're saying, oh, Lewis is doing all the upgrades, so that means it's the car the reason why he's not performing well, not him as a driver, and vice versa. It's that decade-old kind of conversation about it as well. But I still stand by my point. I think George will give Lewis more of the run of the money for it.
Owain, this just became a hot take of rather than Lewis versus George, is it car versus driver? Do you want to follow up on that? Or have you got something to say, Hamilton, Russell?
Just for I mean, I've definitely advocate a little bit here, but like Russell came in with basically no experience in the faster car, back in 2020, and more than held his own. And I think we're just seeing the early parts of a driver's career. Lewis made a number of mistakes, and I agree with Sophia on the fact that Lewis has had, if we count the 2009 McLaren, the 2009 McLaren, possibly the 2013 Mercedes, if you want to look at a tyre wear perspective, and what else? I guess maybe the 2011 McLaren were the only cars that are flat out. Oh, and of course the last two Mercedes are the only cars that have been flat out bad. He never had to do the dirty work in a Williams for ages. I think there's a little bit to be said for Lewis being, having the rep of the green, and a lot of the time, he's not. He's done fairly well with what he's had, but and he has won a race, or had won a race in almost in bad cars, until 2022. So, but I just kind of think that we're just seeing the start of Russell, and he's just gonna increase. Whereas I think Lewis is probably slowing down a bit. He's getting that little bit older, so I think we're right on the transition point here.
Right on the transition point. Well, we got some, with a devil's advocate, we got some opposing. We finally found the hottest of the takes so far. But moving on to the next hot take then. Owain, we're putting you back in the hot seat for the final time. And with 90 seconds on the clock, 3, 2, 1.
My hot take is, if a prospective team meets all the requirements set by the FIA and is deemed capable of running the car at Formula One standard, neither the rights holder nor the teams should be able to block the entry of a new team to the grid. I probably should have phrased it better that way. It would have sounded a bit better. The teams and F1 are likely to choose whether a team joins based on whether that team will be in their best interest. The teams dislike the addition of a new team because it would dilute their payments from F1 for being in the championship, despite the anti-dilution $200 million, I think, which they feel is too low. And no team wants to be 11th, where I don't believe any prize money is paid for your finishing position. That's the case. That was the case when the new teams were on the grid. And the teams are going to feel at risk that they're going to be in that position. In addition, the rights holder, as we have seen with the various bits of sponsorship that have been coming through, are more likely to choose a team that is based on whether it's good for their commercial interests, not the sport as a whole, which is a bit weird, bearing in mind Andretti's trying to get in and they won't choose an American team. They claim they've got one with Haas, and that's about it. The FIA is not an organisation who is completely impartial, but they are more likely to make a decision that's fairer to the joining team. And if a prospective team has the financial means and is judged to have the technical capabilities to construct a Formula One car, they should be able to join without that interference. That's basically what I'm saying. Like, I don't even think
And you're muted because that is 90 seconds. You're the first person to actually go over their time limit. But the message was sent across. If a team can support itself as a new team in Formula One, there should not be any sort of extra team barriers and obstacles to that team joining. Sophia, how would you like to respond?
I 100% agree. I think it's also teams being scared because they're afraid of these new teams who have not raced in Formula One coming in and outperforming them. I think that's probably the biggest fear of teams. You have a team like Andretti, for example, that's been in the rumor mill about coming in for 2026. They've done great in other motor disciplines. So it's not like they don't know what they're doing. They have prestige, heritage, and everything. Maybe not in Formula One, but also in like Indy cars and all of that. And so I think it's a great opportunity as well. And also it allows more teams to kind of get involved as well because it is so competitive. We have seen drivers have to change the goal of a career because there's no seats available. We saw take Felipe Drugovich, who had an amazing season in Formula 2, had no seat and now is waiting for a year. And he's probably not even going to get a seat next year. Like it's hindering a team that has the means and capability and can actually improve this sport. I think it's just being very selfish. I understand, like, obviously sponsorships and money and all of that, but at the same time, it also allows more people to get involved with the sport. I mean, I'm always going to go with speaking about Andretti because I think they're probably the best ones to be involved. But obviously, we've had conversations of High Tech. High Tech's been involved in all feeder series in the Formula One world. That is also a great team that could get involved and also help give development drivers because they're the ones that have done all the way from F4 all the way to F2. Why not, or even F5 or whatever, like the regionals? Why not have a team get involved that is using developmental drivers, using the young drivers in and actually helping them as a career? I don't understand why people are blocking it for it. And it just hinders, I think, in the sport and the viewing and people wanting to get involved. Like, that's a lot of jobs as well per team that is potentially wasting out of opportunity. Great knowledge, great skills, because people are getting complacent as it is. We have seen 11 teams. I don't understand why it's so hard to bring back 11 teams.
Yeah, just to sort of jump in on that again. Teams that are vetoing other teams joining, or sort of like stopping them from becoming part of the grid. So I think it was so Wolf came out a couple of weeks ago and said that we don't have capacity for an 11th team on the grid. And whilst in some circuits, like Monaco or someone like Zandvoort, where the pit lane is really tight and really narrow, that I could potentially see where he's coming from because it's not just it's not just sort of having to extra cars on the grid. It's all the extra personnel. It's basically two more sets of everything. Because obviously you have whilst it's one entity, you imagine have two cars. So there is that to factor in. But if you look at most circuits, if you look at pretty much any permanent racing circuit, they have probably twice as many garages as they need because each team will get 4 to 5 garages. Plus, you have all the scrutineering at the start, and the FIA ones and all the rest of it. But to counter out what Toto said, we've had an 11th team at 2 races this year already, in the shape of, was it AXGP that they're doing the filming for? And they've got a full garage setup. They've got 4 cars, everything. And we had it in 2016. We had 11 teams on grids such as Monaco, on grids such as Baku, places like that. So, no, I said AXGP, Ruby. AXGP is a good friend of ours, Aaron Harper. Check him out, by the way. But yeah, no. There is more than enough room for 11 teams, and teams that are saying, we don't have room or anything, they're just saying that because they don't want to give up, their share of the prize money. That's what it is.
Owain, the discussion is finished. You have some time if you would like to reply.
I mean, if anything, it's not even 11 team. We've had 12. we've had even 20. We've had even 13 teams on the grid. It's not what if it's. Like you say, it's a really good point. There's clearly capacity for an extra team, let alone probably a couple of others. It's pure and simple. I don't want to call it insecurity, but it's literally just risk management from everyone that's not, that's from F1 and the teams. That's it. That's the only reason they do it. Right? If a team meets the requirements and you're if you're if you're unhappy with the dilution payments, put up or shut up. Like, if you don't like it, leave. There's other places to race, but you're here because it's the pinnacle motorsport and you like the marketing prestige. So, you know, it's so weird. They claim to be competitive, but of course they're not. They just want to win. No team wants a competitive championship, so of course they don't want an extra team. I think it's ridiculous for them to claim, oh, we can't do it. It's not possible when it clearly is. And the only reason, just come out with it. Just come out with it. You don't want another team to take down the amount of money you get.
And what it does do as well is obviously there is a financial penalty for not finishing towards the front of the grid, but you obviously do get that aero like development time for the season after. What having that 11th team on the grid does is actually put a full-on financial penalty for finishing last. You get no bonus prize money for finishing outside of the top 10. So it was you that raised it, Owain, like that is a thing. But because we've only had 10 teams, that means that all the teams entering the competition do get a slot of the prize money. But yeah, a very interesting debate that F1 will continue long after we finish this podcast. But Tom, you are back in the hot seat for the final time. There's 90 seconds on the clock and your time starts in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, so my final hot take, and probably my spaciest one of them all, is Haas should drop Kevin Magnussen and optionally replace him with Fittipaldi. Now, the main focus of my point is about dropping Magnussen. And I know he came back in and scored P5 when his comeback, and everybody's like, oh, it's a Viking comeback, I think is Gunther called it. He's competed against Mick Schumacher, who, let's be fair, is not the highest of opposition, or the sort of highest caliber of opposition. K-Mag, has proved this year, especially with Hulk coming back in, who's had a couple of years out. I know he's had a couple of sub appearances, but hasn't raced full time. Has never driven a V6 turbo hybrid Ferrari engine before. Only drove the Aston Martin last year when Seb had COVID. I think Haas should drop K-Mag because he's not doing good enough, and Hulk is basically carrying the team by this point. The race pace doesn't help, but I think they should drop him for a young driver in their academy.
A young driver in there. Do Haas have an academy? But I think part of obviously the problem and the reason as to why they brought back K-Mag and Nico Hulkenberg ultimately was that, risk versus reward return on investment. There was just simply too much payout in terms of, damage to go back. Yeah, exactly. And bringing in Pietro Fittipaldi is that, risk management. Sophia, how would you like to respond to Tom?
I think given the damages and costs that both Mick and Nikita incurred over some of the years, it's going to take time for them to actually regain that money back. So they're better off to have more seasonal drivers. Not to say that they're not going to perform well, but it's, again, that risk of a reward. I think having the reward of having two drivers who know these cars, who know these tracks, I think is probably better. Pietro has done free practice sessions last season because he was the reserve driver for them last season and is obviously this season. And I think even the season before as well. I think, again, he's very similar to how Oscar's been and a few other drivers where they've taken some time out and everything. I personally don't see him getting a seat in Haas, actually, at all. I think he is similar to how Robert Schwartzman was. I can see that being Pietro's career, which is really sad, but he also has a younger brother who's won some races in Formula 2 and is a Red Bull reserve junior driver. So I think I understand replacing Kevin Magnussen. I don't think Pietro might be not the best choice. He is a great reserve driver and has done well in P1s and everything. But I think Haas just needs to get the money more than anything else for it, because they've lost a lot with mixed crashes, and Nikita obviously with losing their main sponsors with everything that happened with the Ukraine-Russia war and everything. So I do understand it, but I think right now they need to focus on getting money and kind of performing average.
Performing average. I joked in our chat as a sort of follow-up to what you were saying, of course, like they've got so much time that they need to make up the amount of money that they've lost. Tying into the previous hot take, that's why they don't want an 11th team, because if they finish last, which let's face it, has have a good chance of doing, that's money that they're not going to win to pay back their collision, finances. But anyway, we'll move on to our final hot take of the show. And Sophia, you started the hot takes. You are you're in the hot seat for the final time, and there's 90 seconds on the clock for your final hot take of the show. The timer starts in 3, 2, 1.
Well, I started off with talking about Lewis and his world championships. I'm going to end this with talking about Max and his world championships. I believe Max will retire either on or before he wins 5 world championships. The reason why is because I think more so this season, because of how strong Red Bull dominance has been, I can see him getting bored. He obviously has made jokes with his engineers about doing some pit stop strategies in order to replace tires in the last lap, trying to steal points from his teammates and everything. I think it's now a game, and I think it's just going to run too much for him. I think if Red Bull wasn't as dominant this season than we expected it to be, I think maybe would have been more likely for him to stay longer. But I know he has signed a long-term contract. But again, contracts can be broken. We've seen that. They've been moved around. I just think he will get too bored. And he's done so much and has achieved so much, minus the World Championships. Obviously, he's won 2. He's on track to win 3rd by Japan, Singapore this year. So it is possible, but I don't think I think he's going to retire before his 5th.
Retire before his 5th, and you're going to finish before 90 seconds.
Yes.
every time. But yeah, there's obviously an element of, it's been said Max is a racer, and if there's one thing that we haven't seen a lot this season, it is racing at the front from Max Verstappen. But Owain, how would you like to respond to this hot take?
I think I'll put it this way. Lewis didn't say that he said that he was he didn't sort of kind of outwardly care about Michael Schumacher's records until he got close to them, and then he went and then he's carried on. It would be easy. They're not. I'll put it this way. They're not. I don't think Max Verstappen is like Seb Vettel. I don't think they're built like that. I mean, it doesn't. I'll put it this way. Like you raised that that he's getting bored, and that they're wanting to do pit stop practice and things like that, and he's having to resort to stealing points off his teammate. No, that's the point. He's to the point where he's stealing points off his teammate. I say stealing, going getting the fastest lap. This guy is always wanting to push on. He's always wanting to go further, do more, be faster. I don't think there's any way in hell that he's gonna quit before he's sort of stopped by either age or slow cars. This guy is only built for winning. And whether that's a character flaw, whether that drive doesn't produce a very well-rounded person, I don't that remains to be debated. But I guess it's for me, it's one of those things where I'm just like, what, it doesn't matter what they're doing. The racing drivers always say that the next win is the sweetest win is the next one. That they're not built to give up or even bail out of a contract halfway through. I reckon he will go as long as he can.
I think I don't know. I think because there's not that much competition at the moment. I think because obviously he wants to see that he is the best. Obviously he has broken records. He is continuously to break records. But I think after a certain amount of time, he's just going to be like, yeah, I'm still trying. I'm still going for the championships. I think he can move over to say, he could maybe even get the Triple Crown. I think that could be a good realistic, because again, it's his competitive nature, but it doesn't have to be that competitive nature. As an athlete, given myself as well, like you were always chasing the high, but it didn't have to be the same path. It could have been from different paths, could have been from different avenues. I think because right now, I think it's the same thing. We know that he's going to win no matter where he's going to start from the grid. He's already broken a record right now about how many times has won from different places on the grid. He is the youngest driver to win points and world championships. Like he has those records that will never be broken. Right now, a lot of them are the more prolonged ones, and I think he's just going to get burnt out and bored by the time that he has opportunities to go to those age records. The non-age records, yeah, 100% he's going to break them. I can see that happening. But being the longest driver and the most consecutive points and all that, from a time perspective, I think he's going to get burnt out before that actually happens. And it could be that Red Bull as well loses their dominance in the next couple of years. We've seen that with Mercedes. We've seen that with Ferrari. We've seen that with McLaren. Red Bull's the next one to kind of do that now as well. And it could be that he wants to bow out before that. I doubt it, but he could go to other disciplines. Like I said, could try IndyCar, go for a Triple Crown. He will still chase that, but I think he will get bored too quickly or burnt out too quickly, whichever comes first.
With Max, he's been in F1 since he was barely out of nappies, and he's still only 25. He's been in F1. This is his 8th season. He's won 2 titles. He's pending something extraordinary happening. He's going to win his 3rd this year, and you might have to look at 2024. He may well win it next year. It depends. It depends if Perez is still his teammate. If Red Bull are as quick as we think they're going to be, and what other teams do. But the signs are looking a bit ominous for next season as well, because he's absolutely at the top of his game at the minute. And we've seen him racing in sort of different, different styles. We've seen him racing in the midfield, getting the odds win here and there. It's like he won in every year from 2016 onwards. Obviously, he didn't win in 2015 in the Toro Rosso, but he took a win in Spain in 2016. Then did circuit Malaysia and I think Mexico 2017. Then won Austria like 2018 and 2019. Even when the Red Bull hasn't been at the front of the grid, and he's had pretty shoddy reliability with the old Renault power unit, Tag Heuer power unit. Definitely not Renault. Definitely, because that one watch manufacturer definitely have an engine plant hanging around in Switzerland. When you look at that, and then obviously when the Renault engines came in, he was still winning. He even took a couple of wins in 2020, opportunistic wins, but wins nonetheless. And then 2021, obviously we saw him fight tooth and nail for that championship. And I'm not getting into that, And then obviously 2022 just sort of like overcame some early troubles and then won a record number of races. And this season, he's just away with the fairies. He said it himself. He doesn't want to be racing for years and years and years and years. So I can see him retiring by the time he's like 30. And I know he says he's not worried, not thinking about titles and all, records and all the rest of it. Everybody says that, then they get close, like Owain said. So take from that what you will. But I think if Red Bull get the 2026 regs wrong and they fall down the pecking order, I think he could take himself out of it.
Yeah, and we have seen, of course, as well, like with Vettel, with Lewis, like when obviously a team does mess up those regulation changes, you want to be in the team that's nailed the regulation changes. You want to have moved before your legacy gets tainted by, we saw Vettel sort of floundering with Red Bull in 2014, moving over to Ferrari where things looked a little bit positive, and then, ended up in Aston Martin around the back of the grid. Like, this was a 4-time world champion who at one point looked unstoppable. But because the team that he was with didn't nail the regulation changes, Vettel obviously will go down as one of the greats, but he's, not being one that's currently talked about right now. Max Verstappen, depending on how 2026 goes, could follow that same pattern. But those were our hot takes. If you have anything to respond to those, we'd love to see that kind of discussion in the comments. But obviously, be aware, everyone has a right to an opinion. no matter how spicy. But let's try and keep it civil here. We are not F1X Twitter. But anyway, now obviously we've had some fiery promo. What am I on about? We've had some fiery hot takes. Where can people promo? So, Owain, let's start with you. You're a Grid Talk co-host. Anything you'd like to plug?
My laptop in. To read all those, to read out my criticism on my hot takes, I guess. That's about it.
Wow. Okay. Sophia, Formula Talk host, but also from EF1. Which would you like to pitch today?
Can I not do both? So Formula Talk, I hosted with Tom. We've had a little bit of a hiatus at the moment, but we are now back. As I am now back in the UK and healthy. So you can hear us on where you listen to Grid Talk. It's the same channels. You can find us on the social medias as well. And as mentioned, I work with EF1 or Everything F1. I actually just finished a podcast with Tom Gaymore from IndyCar, Sky F1 IndyCar. You can find it on wherever you get your podcast from. You can find our socials at Join EF1 and our website, www.everythingf1.
Tom, also a Grid Talk co-host. Anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is our socials. So it's we are at Grid Talk UK on where are we? Twitter, X, whatever it's called. Are we still on Threads? I think so.
We're on Threads.
Yeah, I deactivated mine because I realized I didn't use it. Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, all there. That's my social. Could you tell I don't really do social media that much? Basically, all your social media platforms just search at Grid Talk UK, and also as Ruby said, the podcast is on Spotify and everywhere else.
You've taken my next line. How dare you?
How dare I?
How dare you?
How dare I?
Yeah, if you can't find us at Grid Talk UK on the social media platform, we're probably not on it. But Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most episodes are recorded live, this one not being so. But also Amazon Fire, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to qualifying and the race results. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon so we can get mics, lights, and better recording equipment. And also make sure you subscribe to be the first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content and the second half of the Formula One season. But thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye.